Reporter panel time. Alex Eisenstadt, senior political reporter at Axios. Mario Parker, managing editor at Bloomberg. All right, folks, today, wedged between two very important Supreme Court cases, transgender, birthright citizenship, a campaign finance case, which, Alex, is going to be relevant in the midterms. In broad brushstrokes, how?
It matters because what this does is it breaks down the wall between party campaign committees and candidates and makes it easier and cheaper for parties to spend money in coordination with their candidates. And this matters because Republicans have a huge
bigger war chest.
Big war chest. The DNC has literally no money in its bank account right now. It's in debt. Right. So this matters a lot for Republicans. It helps them in an otherwise really tough year because it accentuates their cash advantage.
Previously, they could do this in what was called independent expenditures. But when you coordinate with a candidate, you are closer on message, both for your candidate and against the rival.
The Supreme Court has done it again. Once more, it has opened the door for even more corporate money to flow into American elections, giving wealthy donors and powerful interests an even easier path to influence campaigns, candidates, and eventually the politicians who are supposed to represent ordinary people. This latest ruling came from a case brought by none other than J.D. Vance and the National Republican Senatorial Committee. And the background here matters.
The Supreme Court ruled Tuesday that campaign finance limits on political parties violate the First Amendment, and it's expected to open up a whole lot more cash to the midterm elections. In a 6-3 decision along ideological lines, the justices struck down coordinated spending limits between federal political candidates and parties. The majority wrote that the limits are not constitutional and found that they're a, quote, severe infringement on First Amendment protected political speech.
The court today said that because there are these other limits in place, these spending caps are no longer necessary to prevent corruption and therefore an unconstitutional restriction on free speech.
The decision sided with Vice President J.D. Vance and other Republican challengers who were targeting limits for donors in the Federal Election Campaign Act. Experts said the decision now changes the election contribution playbook for wealthy donors.
The court has carved out yet another vehicle for wealthy donors to funnel tons of money directly to candidates to help them win elections and ultimately reward those donors with policy decisions that favor their preferences.
In the dissenting opinion, Justice Elena Kagan wrote that the decision, quote, ushers back in the same opportunities for quid pro quo corruption that the contribution limits were meant to check, and went on to say that it ushers in untold harm. In Washington,
when Vance first ran for the Senate in 2022, he was still very new to national politics. In fact, a lot of people forget just how quickly his rise happened. He went from launching a Senate campaign to becoming one of the most powerful figures in the country in only a couple of years. That alone would make people pause. But the real issue in this case goes back to his 2022 campaign. At the time, Vance's campaign was struggling financially. The money was drying up fast, so he wanted to work more closely with the National Republican Party to fund and coordinate political advertising. The problem was that under the rules at the time, candidates were not allowed to coordinate certain targeted ads directly with their party committees in that way. There were limits for a reason. Those limits were meant to stop wealthy donors and party machines from using loopholes to pour massive amounts of money into individual races. So Vance sued. The case moved through the courts and eventually it landed exactly where many people suspected it was always meant to land, in front of the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court essentially said, yes, candidates and parties can, coordinate more closely.
Mario, you have some new reporting, speaking of the midterms, about some muscle from the campaign 2024 coming back inside the White House by the name of Jason Miller.
Yes, absolutely. President Trump and his team are bringing in Jason Miller and others, allies who have been with the White House or with Trump dating back as far back to the 2016.
Jason goes all the way back.
Yeah, all the way back to the 2016 campaign.
So they know Trump, they know his likes, dislikes, his temper, his mood swings. They can sort of ride through all that.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, they won 2 elections, right? They won a 2016 election. Jason was at the forefront of the 2024 election as well, able to kind of charm the president, if you will, into staying on message.
Yeah, with the president and then helping those in the press office be a little bit more aggressive.
Exactly. We've seen...
That's Jason's style.
Yes, we've seen the White House. Well, 2 things happen, right? We saw the White House and the Trump administration get off to a really offensive start, right, during the first 100 days last year as well. I mean, they were very, very aggressive. We've seen them, at least recently, more on their back foot. Heading into the midterm, someone like Jason can get them back on that front foot, be more on offense.
So one poll does not tell everything anyone might want to know about a given race, but now we have 3 polls in Texas, all with the exact same result.
Now, on the surface, some people might look at this and say, why does that matter? Political parties already support candidates. They already spend money. They already run ads. Isn't this just normal politics? But the problem is much deeper than that. The key issue is campaign contribution limits. An individual donor can only give a limited amount directly to a candidate. There is a cap. Once that donor reaches the limit, they cannot simply keep writing checks to that campaign. But political parties operate on a much larger scale. They can raise and spend far bigger sums of money. We are not talking about a few $1,000s here. We are talking about millions. That is why this ruling is so dangerous.
The Supreme Court also struck down limits on how much political party committees can spend in coordination with candidates. The court ruled in favor of Republicans in a case filed by then Senate candidate J.D. Vance. For decades, PACs have been capped on campaign spending, leading to a flood of money going to super PACs with no spending limits. The court's decision could reshape campaign fundraising ahead of the midterm elections. The ruling is expected to benefit both parties.
Before this decision, if a wealthy donor wanted to have a specific candidate, they could not simply give a massive amount to the party and then have the party coordinate directly with that candidate on targeted ads. That kind of coordination was restricted because it could be used to get around candidate contribution limits. Now that wall has been weakened, a donor can give large sums to the party and the party can work more directly with the candidate. In practice, that creates a giant loophole. Instead of giving money directly to the candidate, the donor gives it to the party, then the party helps the candidate. The money takes a different route, but the political effect is the same. That is why critics see this as a form of legalized money laundering in politics. The money goes through the party, comes out looking clean, and then gets used to have the candidate the donor wanted to support in the first place. And the Supreme Court has now given that system its blessing.
Mr. President, I'm here today to mark 16 years since the Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United, which opened the floodgates to unlimited special interest money in our elections. We had a campaign finance system. It wasn't perfect. It was a bipartisan effort to put some limits on things. And the problem with the way it is now, it opens it up and it is impossible to even trace what money is coming in and where. I want to thank Senator Kelly for bringing us to the floor today to discuss such an important issue for our democracy and my colleagues who are here today. In the 2024 federal election, secret money groups spent $1.9 billion, nearly double the amount spent just one cycle before. This undermines our democracy, shakes the public trust. Unlimited anonymous federal spending in our elections doesn't encourage free speech. It drowns out the voices of American people who are seeking to participate.
Even worse, the ruling takes effect immediately. This is not some theoretical issue for the distant future. This is now part of the political system right away at a time when the country is heading into extremely important elections. That means the rules of the game have changed while the stakes are already sky high. Now, there is one temporary silver lining for Democrats. The Republican Party, at least in this cycle, has been struggling to raise money at the level it once did. So while this ruling will absolutely benefit Republicans in the long term, it may not give them the same immediate advantage if they do not have enough cash to fully exploit it right now. But make no mistake, over time, Republicans will benefit from this decision. Wealthy donors, corporate interests, and political operatives now have a clearer path to funnel huge sums through party structure and into key races. But this is not only a Republican problem.
The U.S. Supreme Court struck down a 50-year-old federal election law on Tuesday, erasing limits on how much political parties can spend in direct coordination with their candidates for Congress and president. The case stems from a Republican-led lawsuit backed by Vice President J.D. Vance. The court's conservative justices delivered the majority vote, wiping out congressional limits on political spending. The limits on party spending were designed to stop megadonors from bypassing individual contribution caps by using political parties as a backdoor to fund specific candidates. The Supreme Court had previously upheld the limits in 2001, but the legal battle was reignited in 2022 when Republicans filed suit in Ohio. Democrats had fought to keep the law alive, though both sides openly admit these caps have crippled political parties in the modern era of unlimited outside spending.
This ruling could also push the Democratic Party even deeper into corporate influence, and that is something people on the left need to take seriously. Before Citizens United, the Democratic Party's biggest sources of support look very different. Trial lawyers and unions play a major role. These were groups that, at least in many cases, were connected to workers, consumers, and people fighting corporations in court. But after Citizens United, corporate money exploded. Banking, securities, defense contractors, and other powerful industries gained more influence. The old balance shifted. The money from working-class aligned groups was drowned by corporate cash. This new ruling could accelerate that shift even more.
In a 6-3 decision along ideological lines, the Supreme Court siding with a Republican-led challenge ruling that coordinating spending limits for campaigns violates the First Amendment. I want to bring in NBC News senior justice reporter Ryan Riley to chew over this decision. And Ryan, part of this decision, as I understand it, you correct me if I'm wrong, party committees can spend in coordination with individual candidates. That was part of what the High Court was considering here. We should also point out that among those who brought this case, Vice President J.D. Vance and others. What more can you tell us about this decision and what it means and what it does not mean?
I think overall this means, more influence of money in politics. And, Justice Kagan wrote a pretty blistering dissent here saying that essentially now under this scenario, she proposed this hypothetical situation of a candidate named John Smith and saying what this decision will essentially mean that one person can donate $550,000 that will effectively boost one individual's campaign. And because now the parties there's more coordinated activity allowed. Before that could go to spending such as ads, those outside ads that you often see on your television screen, but now it can go directly sort of towards the campaign. And so that sort of coordination gives, the parties, I think, a lot more ability and makes some of the party players much more powerful in Washington and sort of deciding a lot of these, elections on the ground and figuring out where to spend their money, where they, really need the most help. It basically gives the parties more ability to fuel at various campaigns across the country. And she, in her dissent, in Kagan's dissent, she says, with no limits on coordinated expenditures, the party can serve as the candidate's checking account. So warning basically that this is going to lead towards more money, more influence in politics, and especially the power of those parties and those joint expenditures that they're doing, where they're now allowed to coordinate more closely, directly with candidates. Greg.
NBC News senior justice reporter Ryan Riley there on the campaign finance decision.
So yes, Republicans may be celebrating, but Democrats should not be allowed to quietly benefit from the system either. If corporate money keeps growing inside the Democratic Party, then the party risks becoming exactly what it claims to oppose. That is why voters have to pay attention. It is not enough to say one side is worse and then ignore the corruption on the other side. If Democrats want to be the party of workers, unions, ordinary families, and democracy itself, then they have to prove it. They cannot simply take corporate money, follow corporate priorities, and then ask voters to believe they are different. This Supreme Court ruling is bigger than one candidate. It is bigger than one party. It is another step in a long process of turning American elections into a playground for the wealthy. And unless people push back, the message to every billionaire, corporation, and political machine is simple. Do not worry about the limits. Just find the right route. Send the money through the party and the system will take care of the rest. That is the real danger here, because when money becomes the loudest voice in politics, ordinary voters are the ones who get silenced.